Hey, welcome to Promo Insiders, an ASI media podcast that covers the issues that matter most to the promotional products industry. I'm Chris Ruvo for ASI, and today I'm joined by my colleague Nate Kucsma, ASI Senior Executive Director of Research and Corporate Marketing. We have good news to discuss. In 2022, promo distributors collectively increased sales 11.4% year over year to $25.8 billion. That's according to ASI research. The top line sales tally matched the all-time industry revenue record, which was set in 2019, the last full pre-COVID year. Today, Nate and I are going to delve into things like what drove the impressive increase, how distributors of different revenue sizes fared, top markets, industry confidence, and what may lie ahead for 2023. If you're watching this live, please weigh in with questions and comments. Just type them in the comment box and we'll see them. Nate, thanks for being with me today.
Happy to be here, Christopher.
All right, so let's get right into the factors that drove the growth. So, what are they? What are those factors that drove our big return to growth in 2022?
Yeah, I mean they've been coming since the end of COVID, right? Whenever the end of COVID actually is, but they've been coming since the peak of COVID. It's been the return of live events and the return of just these large gatherings of people, whether it's trade shows, concerts, sporting events. I mean, they went down to zero, right, for the better part of 2020, and then they came back in 21 and 22. I don't know about you, but they're back full time. So much so that I'm actually hoping for a little bit of a break once in a while. That, and let's be honest, it's inflation too, right?
Yeah.
So you have this rebirth of the industries that really drive our business.
Mm-hmm.
But then you also have inflation, which is depending on the product, 8, 10, 12%. So that's also helping up. So even though I don't know that business is back in terms of like the raw number of orders that distributors may be seeing as they did back in 2019, there's certainly increases in other areas that are making up for that, so much so that we now are back at the same identical sales number that we were at in 2019.
All right. Some really important points you made there. I think sometimes there might be a perception that it's a great sales number, but inflation's really what drove it, right? And then there's some who might perceive that like it was just a massively robust sales year, and it kind of both are true to an extent, right? Inflation certainly played its role, but this wasn't just an increase predicated on inflation. There was actually a significant uptick in demand as well. So it was both those factors.
Yeah, let's be honest here. Like I always I get into this discussion with members at ASI and members that are not ASI when we're talking about sales, right? Sales are what they are, and profit margins are what they are. And what we've seen is profit margins stay the same, right? So no matter what, for whatever reason, sales are increasing, whether it's like organic growth, like new clients, what have you, or it's price growth, right? That still equates to the same level, the same sales. The sales are accurate and the same level of profits. So I don't think there's any harm in saying, oh my God, price, sales went up and it was due in part to inflation. I think that's fine. This industry used to be one, and I'm not going back long here, right? I'm going back pre-COVID, where I'd be talking to our members at our shows, and they would say, well, I can't raise the cost of a pen that costs 50 cents by 5 cents, because then my client will go out and find somebody else to give it to him for that same price that I'm now raising the price on. Those days are gone. Right? It's not that people aren't price conscious, but they are much, much more willing to accept high prices. And I've heard leading people in our industry say within the last year, if you're not raising your prices now, you're missing out. You have a chance to do it right now and kind of recalibrate and reset the market. And I think we've seen that a lot in our industry. We've seen that all throughout America and all throughout the world pretty much, right? But that's actually happened. So that is also, so I don't think there's anything negative about that. I think that's a positive, actually, in that we're no longer so sensitive to a 1% increase in sales or anything like that, which I think we happened in the past.
Got it. All right, great points. So let's move on to this next question here, and that's we talk about that top line number is impressive and exciting, but we also want to know was that concentrated with just a few huge distributorships really driving things, or was it more widespread? And I think the research that you spearheaded had some interesting findings on that. So my question would be, what percentage of distributors actually increased sales in 2022? And kind of what does that say about the overall strength of our industry?
Yeah, so just about 60% did, which is a really high number if you think about year over year. I mean, there's so many factors, right, that can play into whether or not a distributor gains or loses business over the course of a year. If their biggest client goes out of business, if all of a sudden somebody on their team leaves and they can't keep it up. I mean, let's be honest, there were challenges to this past year with getting orders in and getting inventory. So with all of that said, just under 60%, 59% said that they increased sales in 2022 over 2021, which in 2021 was a very strong bounce back year from COVID. And the increases were very much, I don't want to say like completely even, right? But when you look at different distributor sizes, if you're talking about the smallest distributors, those that sell 50,000, 100,000 versus those that are selling 5 or 10 million, everybody saw an increase in sales this year. And if you made over $250,000 a year in sales, not profit, in sales on average, you saw about the same level of increase, which was about 11 to 12%. So that's unusual. We don't always see that, right? Normally, and what we've seen in the past years is the smallest companies are the ones that tend to have the lowest sales growth, and the biggest ones, and that's just sort of the way that business goes, economies of scale point of view, right? The ones that are $5 million, $10 million or more, they're the ones that have the sharpest sales increase, sort of like a pyramid. But we're not seeing that right now. What we're seeing is that everybody is growing, which is, I mean, from my point of view, extremely encouraging for our industry.
Yeah, and that's the big top line takeaway there, that this was not, a few mega corporations driving it, that did billions upon billions upon billions. Although there were, we'll get to that in a sec, companies that did crack $1 billion for the first time on the distributor side. But it really was that companies at all pyramids of the industry drove an increase last year, were able to respond to and meet the demand for promotional products that were out there, and were able, as you pointed out earlier, to successfully raise prices, which was necessary to do in an inflationary environment. So when we say collective sales increase, it really was a collective sales increase, or a collective success for the industry in 2020.
It was, absolutely. I mean, you had a lot of, if you go back, right, in 2020, the industry fell by 20%. Right? That's such an understatement, though, right? Because another 20% was made up by PPE, which is gone from our market. So not only if you really start figuring this out, right, the industry went from 25.8-ish billion dollars in sales in 2019 down to around 16 billion in promo sales.
And that's if you remove the PPE, right?
Remove the PPE. So we rebounded. It was 25.8, 16, and then 2 years later, you're back at 25.8. That's a huge, I mean, you want to talk about like a rubber band snapping back. That's what happened here in a manner that I think was much, much faster than I certainly anticipated. Not speaking for anybody else, but for me personally, who has been doing this now for coming up on a decade, very, very surprising.
Yeah, it's I think we felt, as we were seeing the quarterly numbers come in through the year, that it was going to be a strong year. Did we feel it would get to that all-time record level? Probably not. I mean, there was a few, I think, who maybe were extremely optimistic that it would, and they turned out to be correct. But I think by and large, most folks I spoke with throughout the year in the industry did not feel that we'd get to that record number. We did. So it's a remarkable achievement. I do want to ask you another question though, related to, it's a bit similar to the last, but how did distributors of different revenue sizes fare? And you mentioned that, there was roughly same percentages of growth, but I'm talking about in terms of how many. So I pulled a stat out, and I think it was about 6 and 10 medium-sized distributors, and we classify those as like 250,000 a year in revenue to $1 million increased sales in 2022. So that's a really nice illustrative number, 63%. Do you remember what some of the other percentages were, like total percentage of distributors that actually increased sales?
Yeah, those that were above that, they were about 70%. 70%. Right? So they were a little bit higher than that. It's sort of a mix. And those that were lower were right around 50%, right?
Okay.
So that's where you see a little bit of a difference. And that sort of, works itself out in the numbers in terms of the overall percentage of sales, right? That the percentage of sales growth from year to year. But overall, distributors of all sizes were 50% were saying at the smallest end that they increased sales. And that's not to say, right, that the other 50% had decreased sales. That's not what we're saying.
Yeah.
What it's saying is about a quarter and a quarter said that they had either decreased or were about the same. Right. I mean, distributors have a tendency of saying, if it's within 1 or 2 or 3%, it's about the same. And I think that's kind of what you see here. But on either side, by the way, positive or negative. So about a quarter had, maintained a level of sales, which, and again, it was challenging. In some years, that's actually not a bad thing.
Yeah.
But to have about a half of the smallest distributors out there raise their sales as well was pretty encouraging.
Yeah, totally. And great point there on when we talked about 6 and 10 or 60% of distributors overall increasing sales in 2022. There was another 22% who said that they were about steady. So you're
Yeah,
talking about basically over 80% saying that they were up or steady in 2022. So
correct.
again, just emphasizing the point that it was really a strong year across the board for companies of all sizes in our industry. Now, we of course like to look at things like what happened in the most recently preceding quarter to get
Mhm.
somewhat of a sense on where we might stand now. So Q4 in some respects was especially impressive when it came to the percentage of distributors that increased sales. Can you talk about that a little bit? Just what that percentage was, and then what drove that performance in
Yeah,
Q4
sure.
in
So,
particular.
like overall, I think that even when you get beyond just looking at that, right? What to answer your question, about 70% of distributors had Q4 sales that were over
Okay.
their Q4 sales in 21, which is the biggest number we've ever actually seen.
Yeah, it's a quarterly record, right?
That's a quarterly record. Now we've been like within spitting distance of that here or there, but it seems like to me like almost everything changed post, when we went into COVID, because we
Hmm.
had been hovering 30, 40, 45, 50% maybe, right? And
Okay.
then it started to go like a roller coaster up and down. Um, I don't know what the future holds, but that was a very, very high number. What's really interesting to me is this, and this is you know, the business world and everything is very much about perception, right?
Hmm.
And so many distributors throughout the course of the year stated that it's sort of like we were like, as some of our colleagues who are very, very literary minded, much more so than me, you're waiting for Godot, right? You're waiting for this recession to happen. You're waiting
Yeah.
for the slowdown in sales. And so much so that at the beginning of the quarters, they might be expecting something to happen. They might be
Mhm.
expecting this, and then it doesn't, right? So for Q4, just specifically, 52% of distributors said their sales exceeded their expectations
Okay.
at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of the quarter, rather. And that was sort of the similar pattern that we had throughout the entirety of the year. Every quarter, people were
I can't believe I sold as much as I did.
right.
Yeah.
Every quarter, people were waiting for it to happen, waiting for it to happen, waiting for it to happen, and it didn't.
Hmm.
And it's kind of, this is a really strange. I was talking to my wife about this. It's a strange business environment now. When you hear about layoffs at this company, and just the other day, you have layoffs within the tech sector, layoffs
Hmm.
within some other major sectors, and yet unemployment's at an all-time low, business spending's at a high, interest rates are rising. There's a lot of things here that throughout my entire course of
It's
my
so
life.
weird. It defies so many of like what traditional economics indicators might look to for problem versus strength. And like to your point, I don't want to go too far afield, but I think the technology layoffs get so much press and so many headlines because they're such high profile companies, and because it's in a sector that's always considered so robust given how things are nowadays. But overall it's a relatively small drop in the bucket on a macro level for employment.
It is, and it's just so staggering. You always think high interest rates
Hmm.
impact this, and that's going to pull back, and then inflation's going to cause this. It's not happening. I don't know.
At
I
least
don't,
not yet, thank goodness. So
at least
yeah.
not yet, but it's like sort of like we've been waiting for this to happen now for
Right.
well north of a year. And so what the future holds, it's a big, big question here, because everything that I remember from all the economics courses I took back in college,
Hmm.
this is not what they told me.
Right, right. Well, the experts are befuddled because if you see some of the predictions on things like GDP and employment numbers, they've been wrong. But well wrong lately. So anyway, we'll move along though. We'll narrow it back to promo a bit here, and something that everybody always wants to know is what are the hottest markets to sell into? What end buyers are buying? So for kind of Q4 in 2022, were there certain markets that stood out above the rest?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's our industry's not. This is one of these areas where our industry is not overly complicated, right?
Okay.
The biggest industries tend to be the biggest industries quarter in and quarter out, and that held true.
Mhm.
Education, healthcare, construction, nonprofits, fundraising, things like that. They tend to be the biggest sectors
Mhm.
for every quarter, and they that kind of held firm in Q4. There is some level of like a cyclical nature to it, right? But even when that happens, the biggest industries still tend to be the biggest ones. And where that's important to realize that if you have a niche industry, now let's say you have a large consumer products business, you're kind of in a bit of the minority there, right? So you have an opportunity to expand your business by going into other ones where there's more spending, so you can hold on to that. And then grow your business. That's kind of the way I always look at that. Like, yeah, you always want to be in education, you always want to be in healthcare, you always want to be in like nonprofits and associations and things. But if you can get into some of these more niche industries and like get a foothold, I think that also the growth potential is pretty strong.
Yeah, great point too. And I'll just add on manufacturing. I was happy to see it in the top 5 for Q4 in particular, because I do think that even if you have some short-term softness, we've talked about this before, some short-term softness in manufacturing, if we do get the prophesized recession and scale backs in employment, I think long-term manufacturing is going to be on the rise for our industry, given the investments that the federal government and large companies are looking to make in onshoring and nearshoring. So definitely one to watch as we go forward. Okay, so good takeaways there are, I'd say if nothing else, if you're in a niche, try to dig deeper into it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and make sure you're in some of those top line industries that always do well for us: healthcare, education, nonprofit, etc. So good stuff there. Counselor confidence index. I love this metric. It basically it measures sentiment, which to me is very interesting. It's asking distributors basically, how do you feel about the financial health of your business, and kind of, how optimistic are you about things going forward? And the index hit a pandemic era high. I believe the reading was 109. That's above the baseline of 100. And as I say, highest it's been during the pandemic. We can hazard a guess, given the good sales, as to what drove that, but maybe put it into words for us. What did drive that, and do you kind of see that confidence continuing?
I mean, yeah, I do. I mean, it's interesting. Sales went up all throughout every quarter throughout 2022. Yet the confidence index did drop back in Q2, at the end of Q2. And the reason it dropped is because I think that there were all of these storm clouds on the horizon, right?
Okay.
This was a fairly boring metric, Chris. I'm going to be honest with you. From the time I joined ASI back in 2014 till about Q4 of 2021, it was very stable. It was stable. It was high. It was like it was reasonably high, but it was pretty boring. I mean, it just was what it was.
It didn't go too much up. I think in 2018 it might have hit a record, but again, it wasn't like it had to go far to get there. It was people were already feeling good.
Right, but then in Q1 2020, it got really interesting, and it was. I mean, from a research point of view, quite interesting to look at. Maybe not other ways, but it did rebound, and it did drop in Q2. And the reason it dropped was because you had issues. That's when everything, I think, was kind of hitting a peak, right? And I mean, you did so much reporting on this about the supply chain, about price increases, about just general worries in the market. They didn't come to pass, or they did pass, right?
Right.
They didn't get to that level of extreme nature. The recession didn't hit. The interest rates that were rising at record points, 50 basis points, 3/4 of a basis point, they did not have that impact. So then you start to see this rebound again, to the point now where, a high, like the highest we ever hit was 117 for this. This is based on, this is based on the way back in the days of 2000. So the highest we ever got was 117. The lowest we got was 54. That was during, obviously, Q2 2020. So again, like sales have rebounded, so is that. That's rebounded very, very sharply. So no, I think that the overall perception within the industry is looking up. Look, our industry is optimistic, if nothing else. We are filled with a bunch of very optimistic entrepreneurial mindsets.
Yes.
That took that was in 2020. That was the first time I ever saw that actually decline and take a hit. I think now that we are actually back where we see that positive mindset back in place.
Yeah, and to your point, you made it. The low point was a reading of 54, and we're back up to 109. So we've literally doubled up from the low point of the recession. All good stuff. Now let's talk a little bit about where things might be going. We had a confident confident close to the year. What sense do you get from distributors about how industry sales will go in 2023, and about just how they're feeling in Q1 right now? Is there any kind of, I know there's maybe not macro data yet, but just kind of anecdotal sense of where things stand?
Yeah, so I mean, we already had 2 trade shows this year, and unfortunately, one of the things I'm fortunate enough to do in my role is to go to the trade shows and talk to our members,
Hmm.
whether they're in focus groups or whether they're just on the show floor when I see them. And overall, it's enthusiastic. I'm not a rah rah type person here, but the people that I spoke to, they're busy. It's
Hmm.
and they're almost too busy, and that's an interesting dilemma here because when you all of a sudden hear the federal government come out and say that we are at the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years, right?
Hmm.
Well, that sounds great. Cool, right? Great. In theory, it is. But when you can't find people to work at your company if you need to hire, and that's a big constraint to growth here in
Hmm.
our industry. The average sale in our industry is a little bit over $1,000, and if you're big, you might have $2,000, $3,000.
Hmm.
It takes a lot of those sales and a lot of effort to get to that $1 million, $2 million, $3 million business. You need manpower, and that's a challenge. And it's also a challenge within for the suppliers as well,
Hmm.
just for them to get people in there to create the products, to decorate products, to be the customer representatives, right? If you have to call in, it that I think right now, especially with unemployment where it is,
Hmm.
is a challenge for this industry. It's the industry is going to likely continue to grow,
Okay.
barring something happening. And it's a great thing to say because something can always happen.
Right. As we learned in 2020, for
Yeah,
sure.
so you never quite know what's quite next on the horizon. But there's certainly some challenges here, and the challenges are maybe unforeseen ones, but the foreseen ones, so to speak, are the are labor challenges.
Labor challenges, okay, and of course some of the, as we alluded to earlier, some of the macroeconomic concerns that have not yet come to pass, but that there's a lot of doomsday saying on it, but again, that has not become reality. And I'll share with you, just in reporting out, did an article on these, based off of your research and everything, and talked with a bunch of folks in the industry, and it was an interesting phenomenon that cropped up. I said to them, how do you think your distributorship is going to do this year? And to a person, they said, we're going to do great. Like, predicting 25% up, 40% up, doubles, like really aggressive, not just predicting it, but like, hey, we have a plan to get there. And this is how we actually see how we're going to get there. And then I would say, well, how do you think the industry is going to do? And not all, but some would say, oh, well, it might be a flat year, maybe a slight decrease. And it was interesting to me because I think they're seeing some of these same headlines that we're seeing, right?
Sure.
Like, about, like, oh, the macroeconomics. So everybody's feeling that little bit of a hint of caution because they feel like they have to. But then when you ask them about their particular situation, they're like, we're gonna do great. And it's funny, if you multiply that out with just those distributors focused on their business, you have like an industry wide sense of like, hey, things are going to be good because I think my business is going to do good. Well, I think mine's going to do good too. So it was just an interesting phenomenon to report on and note. And I guess the big takeaway is that there is, backing up what you said, a lot of positivity out there, despite the fact that we keep hearing about larger economic headwinds.
Listen, I mean, that's I've seen the same types of things in my research. Every once in a while, I'll throw in a fun question that asks,
Mhm.
"How do you think the industry is going to do relative to you, your business?" And to a person, nobody says, "Well, I think the industry is going to do better than I'm going to do this
Right.
year." So,
Right. That's a
so,
good
so to
point.
be clear, Chris, I know exactly what you're referring to. We don't use that for anything. That's sometimes one of the fringe benefits of being the researcher. You get to add in things for your own
I got
edification.
it, for your own amusement. All right. Last one here. Thank you so much, Nate, for jumping on and chatting with me. Just what will be some of the big business trends that we see in promo this year? And not necessarily right or wrong answers. Just what do you kind of see playing out as some of those larger business trends for our industry?
I mean, I think the trends are going to be. I don't think prices are going to come down. Like,
Okay, I would
man,
agree with you there for sure.
I
Yeah.
wish they would, but I don't think prices are coming down.
Elevated
Um,
fuel and labor costs alone, even if some of the supply chain costs go down, are going to keep pricing where it is.
yeah, we didn't even touch on labor costs, but labor costs are. I mean, we talked about
Hmm.
the chances of finding people to work. Man, labor costs are going up sharply.
Right.
That's going to be a trend. I think there's This is a year where I think end buyers are sort of waiting to
Hmm.
see if they should pull back, but they're not doing it yet because
Right.
everybody's kind of still in this holding pattern. Like something's going to break, right?
Hmm.
Something's going to happen. And last year, I remember at the beginning of the year, and we're not going back more than 12 months here.
Hmm.
It was Omicron, that was the issue,
Oh
right?
yeah,
And then it was
seems
the
like a
war.
decade ago.
Then it was the war in Ukraine starting. That
Mhm.
was the issue. Then it was inflation. That was the issue. Then it was supply chain. That was the issue. Then it was port closures. That was the issue. Port congestion. What's going on here? I mean, that's really what it is. So I would say, and this is not always the best business strategy here.
Mhm.
I would say don't worry about what hasn't happened yet.
Mm. It's interesting.
Because if you worried about what hasn't happened yet for the last 2 years,
Hmm.
you've been stuck in a holding pattern here. I would say live for now.
Okay.
Business is good. Keep plowing ahead. Do what you need
Carpe
to do.
diem promo. Carpe diem.
Right. I mean, I almost seem like that is though, because if you can get really heavily caught up in life and in business into what ifs.
Hmm.
Um, and and news reports negatives. That's how they
Hmm.
make their money.
Hmm.
That bad shit happens a lot faster than good stuff, right? Like
Right.
let's be
Right.
honest
Right.
here. And everybody's waiting for this bad stuff to happen. What if it doesn't actually happen?
Hmm.
Right? If it does, you're going to be in the same boat as everybody else.
Right.
So I would say focus on your core businesses, focus on expanding into some other niche categories that you can get into.
Hmm.
Um, don't be afraid to go with the market trends and to, again, if you have to raise prices, not saying like gouge people, right? But if you have to, don't be afraid to do it.
Hmm.
And, realize that business is really strongly out there still to be had.
Yeah. All right. And as you do that as a distributor going forward, we've done quite a bit of reporting lately about the back end of things, suppliers and supply chain. And what we are hearing from suppliers is very encouraging. And we're not paid to say this here. This is the genuine thing we're reporting. Um, they say inventory levels are just vastly stronger at the start of
Mhm.
2023 than they were heading into 2022. They say that while labor can still is certainly, yes, it's something to contend with. Many report that they're in much stronger positions with their labor force, and that they've also implemented new processes through things like automation and other process improvements that they feel are really going to help improve service levels this year. Um, and those are two encouraging things to go forward with because, to your point that you made earlier, we dealt with supply chain and inventory issues through the whole of 2022 and still had a great year. So if
Yeah.
some of those impediments are removed, it has potential to be even better. I would go forward into 2022, as you say, aware that there's larger issues potentially at play, but focusing less on them and more on what are the strengths of my business, where can I get stronger, what opportunities do I see to improve no matter what's going on with the larger economy. And I think if you do that, and multiply that out over an industry, the industry collectively will continue to do better.
Here, here.
Yeah. All right, Nate, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope everybody listening and enjoyed that, got some insights on industry performance and where it's headed. Nate Kucsma, Executive Director of Research ASI, thank you so much, my friend.
Chris, thank you. See you soon, sir.